Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Seed Talk, Gleanings from the Field, Food Studies in Higher Education. My name is Adia Zeman-Tice, and I'm a program manager here at Seed Coalition. Seed Coalition is the largest regional coalition of higher education institutions in the Midwest, and our goal is to strengthen the capacity of our member institutions to fulfill the public purpose of higher education. You can learn more about Seed Coalition on our website and stay up to date on all of our offerings by subscribing to our email list. And my colleague Kara will be dropping both our website and our sign up to our email list in the chat. And it's our honor to host this conversation here today. Before I turn things over to our presenters, I just have a couple of housekeeping updates to share with everyone. The first half of today's session will be recorded and posted on our Seed Coalition YouTube channel, so it can be rewatched and shared with those who are unable to attend today. We will end the recording after our presenters have shared and before we move into Q&A time. So just so you know that this first portion will be recorded and posted, but the second half, when we're having some more conversation and Q&A, will not be. We know there's a lot of knowledge in the room today, and our hope is that during our time together, we can use it to share and collaborate in learning. So during our Q&A time, please feel free to contribute your own knowledge and pose questions to the full group in attendance. Additionally, please feel free to share any relevant resources that you have in the chat. Our team will be collecting those resources and we will share them in an email after this event along with the recording link. So thank you again for sharing your time with us today. And now it is my pleasure to turn things over to Dan Trudeau, who will facilitate our event. Dan is one of the authors of Gleanings from the Field, as well as a professor in the geography department at Macalester College. Take it away, Dan.
Hey, y'all. Hopefully you can see the slides okay on the screen, and you can hear me okay. All right, fantastic. So first, sincere thanks to Seed Coalition and to Adia for inviting us to share a number of selections from this book, Gleanings of the Field. And I really also want to extend my thanks to the several of the contributors who are here to share their stories. And they'll be introduced in turn. I'm also joined by Bill Moseley, who is one of the editors and a contributor to this book. So the book is Gleanings from the Field, and really proud to say that it's available open source, so you can get access to it electronically for free. And if you put the title into Google, there should be a couple of different options for you if you're interested in it in whole or in part. The last thing I'll say is that this book is an outgrowth of several years of work that's been supported by the Associated Colleges of the Midwest, which is a consortium that links a number of the institutions from which the contributors, or most of the contributors today, are based in. So we have here a collection of essays, and there's 15 in total, and they're really meant to be educational resources. So these are intended for people who are working on education. For many of us, we're working in higher education, so there's a direct contribution to there. Although I think with imagination, one could adapt these to different contexts. And our goal in this is really to focus on developing students as learners who can be adept in being involved in complex problem solving. And we focus on the issue of food security as a way to demonstrate that. Although I think, again, with imagination, this could be adapted to address other kinds of really intractable, thorny issues that we still have to figure out, right? Food security is something that we have to figure out. And we do this in a way to really emphasize the power of experiential learning to make a difference in students' understanding of how they can be agents of change or even understand a problem and where to start tackling it to begin with. So just in general, if you're new to food security, this is a I think, helpful handle to pick up. So it's really about the sufficient and reliable supply of food that is affordable, nutritious, and culturally appropriate. And we'll expand on that in just a moment, but this will give us a starting point. And it's important to note that this kind of intractable problem, it is really complex. It's complex because its causes are different in different places. There are different entry points as a result of its situatedness in specific countries or regions of a country. And it's persistent, and as you try to address it, it changes as well. And so it's an evolving problem. But I think we're also seeing that involvement in addressing these sorts of thorny or wicked problems, it's really important to do that because it affects human society's long-term sustainability on this planet. And this isn't the only issue, but this is an important issue. And we think that focus on this, also the knowledge gained from focusing on this could be transferable to other kinds of thorny issues. All right, so at the core of this book is an argument that we can support students by responding to these wicked problems, these thorny problems like food insecurity, by training them to be more adept critical thinkers, purposeful actors, and persistent or resilient problem solvers. And we think that we're more effective when this training is coupled with experiential learning. And we'll focus on demonstrating that in some of our short case studies. And I want to hand it over to my colleague, Bill Moseley, who will talk about the different dimensions of food security. And Bill, I have control of the slideshow, so just let me know how to advance the slides.
Thanks very much, Dan. So I'm going to be talking about the six-dimensional food security framework, which is one of the conceptual backbones of the book, along with theory on experiential learning and resilience. And this is also how we've organized the different case studies in the book. Next slide. So just by way of background, before I start talking about these six different dimensions, many of you probably know that Sustainable Development Goal number 2 is zero hunger by 2030. We adopted as a global community the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015. And in terms of food security, we've actually been moving backwards. The situation has been getting worse, and we have increasing numbers of food insecure people around the world. So roughly about 700 million people today, 1 in 11 people. Largest number of hungry people in the world are found in South Asia. In terms of a proportion, 1 in 5 people in Africa suffer from food insecurity. Next slide. So these 6 dimensions, historically, there have been fewer. So there have been recent additions, agency and sustainability that I'll talk about. But the point here is that this United Nations definition of food security, a situation that exists when all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. Embedded in that are these 6 different dimensions. So this is sort of logical, and it fits with the way that we've defined food security. So next slide, please. This is also, like I said, one of the conceptual backbones of the book. It's embedded in our theory of change. And what we argue in the book is that if we adopt these learning approaches, experiential learning, encouraging students to engage with wicked or complicated problems, campus community partnerships, that this is going to lead to certain types of dispositions on the part of our students, understanding, empathy, motivation, and resilience. And then if we interact with this more nuanced understanding of food security, acknowledging how that's sort of situated within broader structures, that this is going to move us in the right direction toward a more resilient food system. Next slide. So traditionally, what a lot of people globally in the United States have focused on is food availability. Is there enough food on the market to meet the sort of caloric needs of the population? So this is, at the end of the day, this boils down to food production. And oftentimes people think about this at the household scale, the neighborhood scale, the city, the state, or the nation. So this can be conceptualized at a variety of scales. Next slide. But a narrow focus on trying to solve the problem through production has been heavily critiqued. For example, the UN used to have the food balance sheet approach, where they would just look at, total amount of food produced within a country plus net imports, and they would compare that to the caloric needs of the population, and they would assume that everything was okay, yet there would be problems because they were ignoring other dimensions of food security. Or trying to just produce more food through industrial food production. The Green Revolution in areas of the Global South has led to less sustainable systems that are less equitable. And this includes in the United States, in the upper Midwest, where we've been very focused on the monocropping of maize and soybeans, and that has led to a less resilient, more vulnerable system. So, maize is an open pollinator. If there's a drought in the middle of July, we have a big crop failure, which we've historically seen in the past. Next slide. So I think the first big shift comes in the 1980s when Amartya Sen, who's an Indian economist, got his the Nobel Peace Prize for his work on access or entitlements. It's basically, just having the food there is not enough. People need to have access to it. So either they're producing the food themselves, they have the money to purchase it at the market, or they can get it from neighbors and friends. And Amartya Sen conceptualized this in terms of entitlements. What are people's legal access to food? And for Sen, most famines in democracies occur when there's entitlement failure. It's not about a total lack of food production. Next slide. Just a couple of quick examples, sort of combining food access and food availability. This is work I did with a former student, Joel Larson. This is a map of the Twin Cities, and he was looking at census blocks and average income within different census blocks in the Twin Cities. So that's sort of our proxy for access. How much money do people have? And then availability, the proxy was supermarkets, and those are represented by the dots here. And so the concern was that if you had neighborhoods that were lower income and they didn't have grocery stores nearby, you could potentially have a problem. Next slide. This is another example of work I did with a student in South Africa on the supermarketization phenomena, so large retail grocery stores moving into lower income areas. This is a map of Cape Town, and Steve Payton, Jane Battersby, and we looked at the distribution of those supermarkets, again, comparing it to income in different census tracts. But here the complicating factor is that oftentimes the supermarkets were pushing out smaller informal shops, which are known as spaza shops in South Africa. And the smaller shops often sold things in smaller quantities. They sold them on credit, so they were more accessible to the poor. So just having more supermarkets doesn't always solve the problem. Next slide, please. Utilization. This is probably one of the least understood dimensions of food security, and it really has to do with, do you have the proper infrastructure, clean water, kitchen facilities, proper sanitation, cooking know-how in order to prepare a healthy and nutritious meal? So if I think about the unhoused population in the Twin Cities, one of the big challenges they face is they don't have kitchens, right? And so you can give them access to grocery stores and assistance with that, but if they don't have a place to prepare that food, that's going to limit what they can consume. Again, Jane Battersby and I did some work in South Africa looking at this problem, and here we found that when the cost of cooking fuel went up, it was more expensive for people to cook, And so they started buying ready-made products that were less nutritious for them. Next slide, please. Stability refers to long-term stability in food prices and supplies of food. And so for low-income households that already spend a large chunk of their money on food, if the price goes up, this is a huge, this has huge implications for access. So stability is a factor, especially if it's a shock relative to the past. So this is showing you real and nominal food prices over time. Real is in yellow, it's adjusted for inflation. And it's showing you big spikes that we saw in 2007, 2008, 2011, 2012, and more recently with COVID and the war in Ukraine. So these big shocks have limited people's access to food. Next slide. The fifth and sixth dimensions, which are the newest, are sustainability. Can you produce food over the long run without undermining the environment? This hasn't been considered part of the traditional 4 dimensions of food security, but increasingly it's being accepted in the academic community and in a lot of municipalities. It seems like a no-brainer with the increasing threats of climate change. And then the last dimension, next slide, please, is agency. Agency basically refers to, if we're thinking about food production, farmers' control over their food production system. Can they decide on what seeds and inputs to use? Consumers' control over the kind of food that they eat. And there's been a lot of pushback on this dimension from some quarters of the food security community claiming it's too political, but a lot of the evidence shows that this control is really important. Last slide for me, up next. And so you can kind of think about these different dimensions. You can think about different shocks to the food system: inflation, drought, rising energy prices, cuts to SNAP benefits, all things that we're experiencing to varying degrees today. And you can think about how it impacts the different dimensions. Thank you. I think I nailed it right on 10 minutes.
Right. Fantastic, Bill. Thanks for walking us through these different dimensions of food security and thinking about how it ties into the theory of change framework that's at the core of the Gleanings from the Field book. And so what will follow next is that we'll hear from 3 different groups of contributors that are going to speak to different dimensions. So first up is Jay Zambito from Beloit College, who will be speaking on the themes of food production and availability. And then Jay, please take it away, but just let me know when you would like the slide to be advanced. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, so this is what I'll be presenting. I have 3 slides. They come from chapter 5 of the book. And I'll be talking about what we here at Beloit College call BUG, which stands for Beloit Urban Garden. I want to acknowledge my co-authors here. The majority of them are undergraduate students at Beloit who are very active in Beloit Urban Garden and in BUG, as well as other colleagues. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of pictures here, and the way to sort of look through these different pictures of bug is to start in the upper left. So it's spring 2014. So about 10 years ago, a little bit over that, is when the Beloit Urban Garden was started by a bunch of students through a small grant that they received. Subsequent to that, the students started applying for funding to turn this into a student club. And since then, this has been funded each year through a proposal they put forward as a student organization on campus. And so this is a student initiative to have this garden on campus, and it's also as a student-run organization. And this is really an experiential learning opportunity. So these students have the opportunity to implement different gardening styles, to implement different types of to plant different types of vegetables and see what works at different times of the year. They really have agency and control over this. That means the students are trying new things. They're learning what works and doesn't work. That also means, though, an organization like this, which is student run, there are sometimes hiccups, like when students graduate and maybe there's not a new student to take over a leadership role. Or one of the major things we dealt with was the pandemic and the loss of a growing season. And then how do you recruit new students when they show up in the fall and there's not ripe tomatoes on the vine waiting for them, to show them, what a productive garden can produce if they put in the work ahead of time. And so starting up in spring 2014 in the upper left, you can see this is an urban plot. You can see some of the original gardens that were put in. Initially, this was mostly row gardens or some small contained / raised bed gardens. On the left side, that series of pictures, what I want you to take away from that is the students tried a bunch of different things. And each student that worked at the garden, they had their own preferred vegetable they wanted to grow. They had a size in mind of the plot they wanted to grow it in. And so this garden, which uses organic practices, literally grew organically from the different students at different times. But that resulted in a couple different problems. And one of them is accessibility, physical accessibility. There were certain rows in the garden that, were not physically accessible to all students that wanted to participate because, there may not have been paths that were even visible in some cases, or there were just parts of the garden that were away from the road, so it was hard to move supplies or to bring water to them. And so students, use this opportunity to think about the food that they're producing, and how does one produce their own food, produce affordable, nutritious food, but in a way that all students can participate as a student organization. On the right-hand side was an effort that was undertaken by a series of students to essentially redo the garden. So with the work of facilities here at Beloit College, the students leveled the plot, and then used some of their funding to put in raised beds. And you can see in the lower series of pictures on the right, some of the raised beds that were put in. There's a lot of space in between the raised beds to help make them accessible, and putting things near pathways as well in order to bring in supplies. They got a new shed with a ramp on it that made it so that the shed was accessible. And these were all, again, student-led efforts in order to make the garden more manageable, right? Because a raised bed is more manageable than a series of rows on the ground. To make it clear where the gardening areas were. So as you're passing on the garden to the next generation of students, it was pretty clear to see, where we should be weeding and where we should be planting things. And then again, just to make increased physical accessibility. The other things the students thought about in terms of accessibility for food was education. So many of these students coming in had never gardened before. And so students developed a series of signs and using universal design principles to make sure the text was legible, the wording was correct, the graphics were appropriate, so that new students coming in could understand, okay, this is what was done in the past for example, crop rotation, and this is now how I can implement that to keep that initiative going. If we go to the next slide, please. The other aspect of a student-run garden, as I mentioned, you have to worry about turnover, is sustainability. And so one of the things that the students worked really hard on was coming up with an annual schedule. And so it was pretty clear what needed to be done when. So as new students joined, they already had a task waiting for them to keep the garden on track. But also as people were leaving, right, they could leave behind that institutional knowledge they gained by adding certain things to this task list. And as you can imagine, in the upper Midwest, it's a relatively short growing season. And so there's, you have to make sure you start your seedlings in the college greenhouse in February through April, so that you're ready to go in May when it's time to get things in the ground. You want to make sure you have regular meetings. You want to hold elections for officers for bug. And so all of these types of things that the students implemented, from physical accessibility, education, to, in this case, just a detailed plan of what needs to happen in sequence, all improve the sustainability of the garden and help improve access for students so that they can produce their own food, learn where their food comes from, and have affordable and nutritious, organically, using organic practices, affordable and nutritious food that they can have themselves, share with others, and in many cases even gave to the campus kitchen, and they would go into the meals for other students. And that's my last slide. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jay. Appreciate you sharing that work. And again, Jay was speaking to this theme of food production and availability. And next we'll turn to hear from Todd Armstrong, who is at Grinnell College. And Tom will speak to, Todd, my goodness. Sorry, Todd.
That's okay.
Todd Armstrong. And Todd will speak to food utilization, that aspect of food security. And so without further ado, Todd, please take it away.
Okay, thanks very much, Dan and Bill and the organizer Seed Coalition and Dia for putting this together. And it's been it's been a joy to be part of this whole process, and I'm glad to be here. I'll say a few words about the creation of the Global Kitchen. This was an idea that had a serendipitous moment as part of a planning project for a new building. So we at Grinnell a number of years ago, we started to put together the plans for a huge complex for the social studies and humanities departments. And so we're all in the same building. And you can see there in the lower left-hand corner a blueprint of the new building. And as part of that, the idea of a kitchen started to percolate. And I was in the room often enough to when they started talking about it, I was promoting it. I'd used a sort of inadequate campus kitchens to teach culture through food preparation, kind of as an extracurricular activity. And I started to think carefully about how this might be integrated more intentionally and more purposefully into the campus culture. And as part of that planning process, I was able to sort of insert myself at pivotal moments. And once it was built, somebody had to take it on and try to create something. And so I did that through a pilot project that we had with some internal funding. And one of the things I want to emphasize here is in creating this new organizational structure within the institution, is I approached it very much from a collaborative perspective, and that meaning faculty, staff, and students. I happen to think that the most interesting things that happen in higher education do involve that kind of collaborative dimension. And so I got some funding and I got a team of students together and we began to cook to figure out what we were going to do. And we developed a process. We proposed a staff position, a culinary coordinator. We proposed as well a position for a faculty member to run a team of kitchen mentors. And that after those 2 years, our success was pretty clear in our sort of track record, and I'll say more about that in a moment. And in a couple years ago, we were regularized and we became officially part of the Institute for Global Engagement. In other words, we're a unit within a larger unit in the college. So we have a kind of an umbrella organization within the college. And just as a brief aside of endeavors that don't fit into the usual sort of categories can sometimes fall through the cracks. And I have a few things about a garden that we have that I'm trying to figure out, and I'm looking to Jay here. I may need some advice about keeping that going. And so finding that institutional niche was really important. And you can see here in the upper left hand, this is our team a couple years ago where we presented to the Board of Trustees sort of our work when they were on campus. This was strategic also to give a sense to the sort of powers that be what's going on campus. But I am happy to say that we've become an official unit. Next slide, please. And just this will just, so if you wanted to learn more about us, you can go to our website. This is one of my classes. So I come at this from the perspective also as a professor of Russian. We're one of the sort of shrinking departments for the last 20 or so years. So anything we can do to bring students into the classroom is a benefit. And so that's actually what inspired my work in food in the first place, is to create a course that would integrate experiential learning, that is cooking to learn, as it's been termed, about Russian Soviet culture. This is a gathering of that class, and we were doing some work with early harvest from the college garden that I'll say a little bit about in a moment. Next slide, please. So here I have some student testimony. They say it best. These are from a poster that our culinary coordinator and I presented at NAFSA a year ago May, at the annual conference in New Orleans to talk about some of the things that we were doing in our institution. I offer here a post from the Grinnell College Instagram just to give you a sense of the popularity of the space. This is the first meeting of a first year tutorial that I'm teaching right now called Food Stories. where we're exploring a number of different themes that have to do with food systems, food insecurity, food and narrative. Everybody has a food story and they write their own food stories. And then also civic engagement. Everybody has a food story, but not everybody has a good food story. So this sort of sense of obligation that comes with enjoying the benefits of being in this small liberal arts college with these incredible resources. We have to remember that even in the town of Grinnell, there are people going hungry. So that becomes very much a part of my course and how I try to impress on students the kinds of the need to think about the community around us. And as part of our class, each time I teach this, we'll sponsor one of our community meals, and I'll say a little bit about that in a moment. This picture on the left is from our very first class meeting. We're using apples that we foraged off campus that become part of a dish, and so it's teaching students how to think about food in different ways. And here, this question of utilization to me is near and dear. It's one thing to talk about food security and security and so on, but and it's also to give food to charitable organizations and so on. But if the people receiving it don't have a knowledge base or a skill set to do something with it, that can become an issue. So this course really does bring students into close contact with food and foodways and with preparing food. And many of them have never cooked anything in the kitchen. And so it's really a wonderful and inspiring process to see students really kind of understand where their food comes from and how to prepare it and how to share it with the community. Why don't we go to the next slide, please, Dan? So taking that experiential learning and thinking about our obligation to the community, and to quote Jose Andres, who I saw last week at the Borlaug Dialogues in Des Moines, hunger anywhere is a moral failure everywhere. So that, again, that obligation to address the question of food insecurity is first and foremost in a lot of what I do. And so as part of the Global Kitchen, we've integrated different activities and so on that speak to that, to the needs of others and to developing community. The Global Soup Kitchen is a tradition to prepare soup for campus activities. The community meal is something that's sponsored off campus at a local church. It's non-denominational, but different groups sponsor that meal. And so my classes will traditionally prepare that. One aspect of this that I would like to work more on is the question of agency, right? And there's a certain assumption on the part of a small liberal arts college that we know how people ought to be eating, right? And I think it's really important to involve the people that you're trying to help in the decision-making process and thinking about what they might like to prepare. So I would really love to develop some collaborative efforts where we bring in members of the community and cook together and work through different approaches in that regard. The class regularly sponsors study breaks that feed then students get to treat their fellow students to different things that we prepare in the kitchen. That's a really empowering moment. We've also contributed items that we've prepared to the local food bank. And this is an area that I'm really interested in because, and I'm going to tie this into the garden. And actually, we could go to the next slide, Dan, please. So I've become involved in the last year or so in the Grinnell College Garden, and one of the goals of the garden is to provide produce for both for the campus kitchen or for the dining services, and also for the local food bank. In the case of the former, there's the scale is such that there's little impact, right? So I've been thinking about how can we make a better impact, or how can we bring that produce produced in the garden into the community with a greater impact. The other part is to deliver a box of vegetables to the local food bank. it feels very virtuous, right? I mean, you drop this off, but then you're done with it. And for me, as someone who gardens himself and who sort of is swamped in the fall by the flow of harvest, there's a lot of work that happens on that end of things. And so, what should we be growing for the community? What does the community know how to prepare? What would the community like to prepare? Right? I think these are lessons that students need to really understand as well. So this summer, I've sort of taken on a transition role. There was a retirement of the person who ran our college garden. It's still in process, so I can't give you very many concrete details other than to say that what I would like to see happen there is for the things that are grown in the college garden to come through the global kitchen and become and give students a chance to figure out or to understand and learn how to process a harvest, and also to provide the local community with items already prepared to eliminate some of that work. So instead of a box of zucchinis, a box of prepared zucchini fritters or something, as an example, that the community might benefit from, and a mother of children would embrace to save some time to feed her family. But again, this also needs to involve the community and agency and people thinking, having some sort of role in what gets produced and how it gets made and so on. And here you can see the two garden workers brought over the harvest from that particular month. We cooked a number of different things. We had a study break for students on campus, and then we made far more than we would need, and we boxed that up and took it down to the food bank. So again, I'm working on this next part of what I'll call the Grinnell food ecosystem, and the garden as attached to the kitchen is something I'm really intent on developing, and I'm going to look to Jay for some advice on that. I think I'll stop now and pass it on to our next presenters. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Todd. We'll be turning over to our last set of presenters before we open it up for questions and discussion. And so I wanted to introduce Janaki Ranpura and Valentine Cadieux. Valentine is at Hamline University, and Janaki is a spatial practitioner. They'll speak on the theme of food attitudes, as well as thinking about iterative process and design. And please let me know when to change the slide.
Thanks so much, Dan, and thanks everybody for coming today. We're going to talk a bit about our chapter on the pedagogy of mess and where we have taken this project in a subsequent iteration on a project called Serving Earth. And just a quick overview, we're going to talk about the design thinking elements that we're filling in today's webinar, and then a little bit about the pedagogy of mess, and then on to Serving Earth.
So this is Janaki talking, and we're going to use one audio, but two videos. Yeah, so fortunately, you guys get the fabulous opportunity to learn some design jargon. It's very, very familiar in the design field, in the design world, and so I'm going to just throw out some vocabulary that might be helpful when thinking very specifically about I have an idea because I saw something in the world that wasn't working very well. It's what in the design world is called a pain point. And I have an intuition about how I might approach ameliorating that if there's some problematic point. And so what one does then is go through a little bit of a design process. So that's what Valentine did twice in order to get through to the two different sort of global projects that we're going to show. And so on the screen now, you can see a process that's really commonly known from the Stanford Design School, and they're big thinkers in this field. And so the idea here is that you're not going for solution making, you're going for proposals, or they're also called deliverables. So what that means is that you don't think of a problem and then find a solution and stop. One keeps going and one sort of keeps iterating, which relates to lots of the other ecological thinking that is embedded in our chapter and our other work. So if we can have the next slide. So this is another version of design thinking, just showing how many different ways you can elaborate what that means, many details on how that can happen. And I'm not going to go into all of those today, but anyone who's interested in using it as a process to get to different solution points can look up some of those other ways of elaborating that process. So we can have the next slide. Some of the thinking that we've had is not only coming from the fields of social science and design, but also art and art making. And this is a very slight adjustment of Stanford Design School's thinking process made by an artist called Scott Kildale. And some of the words here are just sometimes a little bit more useful when one is thinking about like, how do I come to a presentation point, a deliverable or a product point? Next slide, please.
So in the pedagogy of mess, we used this kind of process to get students to be more comfortable with the messiness of food and agriculture systems and to really think about resilience in the face of the challenging part where you delve into the complexity of a pain point. And two aspects of it we want to touch on briefly today are that we were really focused on trying to provoke ritual, and we were using these design processes and getting students to be more comfortable with the iterative nature of addressing pain points. And one of the things we realized, we could switch to the next slide, is that although we got well into a lot of the metaphors of the food system and people manifested these in a whole series of interactive art exhibits and an event at Hamline, that the ability to actually create new ritual was really limited in the time we had. So we can move to the next slide.
One of the ways that we started to think about what does ritual mean and how does it work? So one of the comments that we got was about the time-based nature of ritual. So what we started to think about for our next iteration is we're emphasizing the ritual aspect that had been missing in some of the stuff that we wrote about in the chapter, was to look really into time and materiality. So if we can have the next slide. So we ended up doing a project called Serving Earth. So the material that we were working with was the earth itself, which is obviously a product that changes, decays, is dynamic. You can build from it, and it dissolves as well. And so we decided to make a whole dinner based around that idea. So the next slide, please. The part of it where we were emphasizing ritual and time-basedness was to actually have people who are coming to the dinner create dishes that would then be used for a next dinner. So they were using dishes that dissolved, and they were creating dishes for the next dinner, which would then also dissolve. Next slide, please. So we worked on lots of iterations of how do you generate a dish like that, and how do you create a process that would be participatory. And so you're just seeing some photos of some of the parts of that process. So we can have the next slide. And what ended up happening at that dinner is that people very naturally put all of the parts of the dinner into a mound on the earth at the end and started pouring their water glasses and pouring any water that was on the table onto that mound. So what we discovered is by working a little bit more with time and working a little bit more with material, going off those intuitions and testing them, that people responded with, in fact, more ritualistic looking aspects and more ritualistic discussion and sensation. Next slide. And this is just a little model of one of the actual slip cast bowls that was then pit fired. So you can see how the earth shows signs of destruction and decay and discoloration that lends itself a little bit to the contemplative nature that we were going for.
And we'll leave it there, but to say part of what we learned was that by allowing people to bring the rituals they already have attached to earth and to meals, we could use a much more compressed time to create a ritual that really got people into learning through mess. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, y'all. Thank you, everyone. Bill, Jay, Todd, Janaki, and Valentine for sharing your contributions to the book